Please help me to reach 7,000 subscribers. She always believed that quiet mornings were a kind of blessing. The kind that wrapped around you like a soft blanket, reminding you that life, even with all its noise, still had pockets of peace. Madison Blake held on to that belief more than anything else. Living in a small but charming neighborhood outside Charlotte, she had shaped her life into something simple: warm coffee, early sunrise, and a workplace where people greeted each other with genuine smiles. Most people knew her as the woman who never missed a birthday, who brought extra cookies on Fridays, who always asked how you were and waited for the real answer. She had a heart everyone trusted, and she carried that trust carefully, as if it were something precious. Her job at the architectural studio wasn't glamorous, but she loved it. She loved the smell of fresh blueprints, the sound of pencils moving across tracing paper, and the quiet pride on her coworkers' faces when a design came to life. She loved that every day felt predictable, in the best way. And then there was Daniel Brooks. People called him calm, steady, reliable. The kind of man who laughed softly and listened deeply. Madison never planned on falling for someone like him. But it happened anyway, in the way he remembered her favorite tea, in the way he opened doors without thinking twice, in the way he treated her kindness not as weakness, but as something rare. Life felt good with him. Not loud, not dramatic, just good. On that particular Tuesday, Madison was humming while packing her lunch, sliding a handwritten note into Daniel's sandwich bag like she always did. A tiny heart in the corner. A simple "have a great day." She didn't know why she loved doing it. She just did. Maybe she believed that small gestures kept people close. She didn't notice the quiet shift in Daniel lately. The longer nights at work. The strange pauses in their conversations. The way his eyes seemed to drift somewhere she couldn't follow. Madison had always trusted easily. Too easily, some would say. But trust was her nature. And when you see the world through soft lenses, you don't catch the cracks right away. She left the house with her hair pulled back, her favorite sweater on, and that gentle smile she wore without effort. She waved at her neighbor, tucked a stray leaf from the porch plant, and stepped into the world with the same optimism she carried every morning. Everything felt normal, ordinary, safe. She didn't know that this was the last quiet morning she'd have for a long time. She didn't know that the life she'd built so carefully, so lovingly, was already beginning to shake beneath her feet. She didn't know that within hours, everything she believed about loyalty, love, and trust would be tested in ways she never imagined. But that was the thing about storms. They never announced themselves. They arrived quietly, just like this one. The day unraveled slowly, like a thread pulled from the hem of a favorite sweater. Nothing dramatic at first, just little things. A text from Daniel saying he'd be running late again. A meeting at the office that felt off rhythm. A strange heaviness in the air that Madison tried to ignore by burying herself in work. But uneasiness has its own way of whispering, even when you pretend not to hear it. Late afternoon. Her coworker Jenna stopped by her desk with that careful tone people use when they don't want to scare you. She asked if Madison was okay, mentioned she seemed distracted, even offered to grab coffee together. Madison smiled it off, insisting she was fine. She always said she was fine, but her eyes kept returning to her phone. The message Daniel still hadn't answered. The minutes stretching into hours, and then came the moment she wouldn't forget. The studio's conference room had glass walls, almost too transparent. And while walking past it, Madison froze. Not because of the presentation happening inside, but because of the two people whispering near the back. Their faces too close, their voices too soft. Daniel and Elise, the new hire from marketing. Madison didn't hear the full sentence, only fragments. The kind that hit harder than complete words ever could. I can't keep pretending. She doesn't suspect anything. We just need time. Her heart didn't break all at once. It cracked in quiet, brutal pieces, sharp enough to make breathing feel like swallowing glass. For a moment, she stood completely still, the world around her blurring, distant, muffled, like someone had pressed pause on everything except the sound of her own pulse pounding in her ears. When Daniel finally noticed her standing there, the color drained from his face. Elise stepped back, fast, too fast, yet not fast enough to erase what Madison had already seen. That he walked toward her, guilt written across his expression, hands half raised as if reaching for her would fix anything. She stepped back before he could speak. The movement was small, but it carried the weight of an entire heartbreak. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't ask the questions tearing holes inside her. She simply whispered his name, quiet, wounded, unfamiliar on her tongue. Daniel tried to explain, stumbling over excuses, reaching for explanations that came out weak and tangled. But betrayal doesn't soften when wrapped in pretty words. It only becomes clearer. Madison walked away before he could finish the sentence. Each step felt heavier than the last, like her body was trying to hold itself together even as her heart unraveled. She didn't remember grabbing her bag, didn't remember leaving the building, didn't remember how she made it to the parking lot. She only remembered the moment the car door closed and the silence hit her like a wave. She had always imagined heartbreak would be loud, screams, sobs, shattered glass. But it wasn't that, it was numbness. Quiet, cold, staring through the windshield. She felt her life splitting into two parts, the one she thought she had, and the truth she never saw coming. And somewhere in that devastating quiet, a different kind of feeling began to rise. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. A painful, searing clarity that told her this was not the end. No, this was the beginning of a version of herself she never knew existed, that a version that would no longer be easy to deceive. A version that didn't break. She transformed. And transformation always starts in the darkest moment. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next morning felt different, as if the air itself had shifted. Madison woke with a heaviness that settled deep in her chest, the kind that makes you pause before getting out of bed, hoping yesterday was some terrible dream. But it wasn't. Reality waited for her like a cruel reminder. She moved through her routine mechanically. Coffee, clothes, keys, each action stiff and out of rhythm. Even the sunlight coming through the blinds felt unfamiliar, harsher somehow. She had always seen the world in warm tones. But heartbreak changes your vision. It forces you to notice the shadows you once ignored. When she walked into the office, conversations halted for a moment, just long enough for her to know people were already whispering. News travels fast in places where everyone pretends not to care. Eyes followed her, then quickly turned away. A few coworkers offered awkward smiles, the kind that tried to be supportive but only deepened the ache. Jenna approached her gently, asking if she wanted to talk. Madison shook her head. She wasn't ready. Not for sympathy, not for questions, not for the fragile kindness that could break her if she let it in too soon. But the real blow came when she walked into the main workspace. On the center table, left open and impossible to miss, sat a stack of printed emails. Emails between Daniel and Elise. Personal messages. Intimate messages. They weren't explicit, but they were unmistakably inappropriate. And someone had quietly placed them there for everyone to see. Madison felt her stomach twist as she approached, every step resounding like an echo in her chest. Her coworkers weren't reading them anymore. They pretended not to, but the damage had already been done. Rumors don't need a voice. They grow from silence alone. Her name was highlighted in one of the emails. A sentence she would remember far longer than she wanted to. She's too trusting. She'll believe anything. Madison's hands trembled, but not from sadness this time. It was something deeper, humiliation, betrayal layered on top of betrayal. The sting of being talked about like a problem instead of a person. She turned and found Daniel standing behind her, his expression tight with panic. He reached out, whispering her name like it was some fragile apology he hoped might save him. She stepped back again, just like she had yesterday, this time without hesitation. "Stop," she said quietly. Not angry, just tired, exhausted down to the bone. People watched, pretending not to, but she felt every pair of eyes. It wasn't just her private heartbreak anymore. It had become a spectacle. Daniel tried to defend himself, explaining that the emails weren't meant to be seen, that they were taken out of context. But context didn't matter. Words reveal people in ways excuses never can. Elise walked up next, her face flushed with embarrassment. She tried to say something, but Madison lifted a hand, not to silence her, but to steady herself. She didn't need explanations from either of them. She had already heard enough. The studio director stepped out of his office after hearing the commotion. His disappointment wasn't for Madison. It was for Daniel and Elise, for dragging their mess into a space that relied on trust and professionalism. He asked Madison if she wanted to take the rest of the day off. She didn't answer at first. She looked around the room at the space that once felt safe, warm, predictable, a place she loved. And now all she could feel was the weight of humiliation pressing against her ribs, making it difficult to breathe. Finally, she nodded and walked out slowly, each step heavy and deliberate. No one stopped her. No one dared. Outside, the sky was cloudy, the wind colder than usual. She crossed the parking lot with her arms wrapped around herself, not to keep warm, but to hold together the pieces still trying to fall apart. Sitting in her car, the tears finally came. Not soft ones, not gentle ones. They were raw and shaking, the kind that leave you breathless. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and let herself break, not because of losing Daniel, but because of the humiliation she never deserved. But even in that moment of devastation, something else began to stir, a spark buried deep beneath the pain. A quiet resolve, a whisper of strength she didn't know she had. She wasn't done, she wasn't ruined, she wasn't defeated. She was waking up, and the people who tried to break her had no idea what that awakening would mean. Madison spent the rest of the afternoon driving with no destination, letting the miles blur together until her breathing steadied and the storm inside her settled into something quieter. Not peace, just clarity. The kind that comes after you've cried everything out and there's nothing left but truth. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the house felt different. Too silent, too still. It carried memories she suddenly didn't want to walk into. So she grabbed her bag and headed instead to the small shed behind the house, the place where she stored old boxes, forgotten projects, and things she never had the heart to throw away. She wasn't sure why she went there. Maybe she was looking for distraction, or maybe her instincts were guiding her somewhere her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Either way, she stepped inside, letting the dim afternoon light spill across the dusty shelves. One box caught her eye. A plain cardboard one labeled with Daniel's handwriting, receipts, and paperwork. She stared at it for a long moment, her pulse picking up. Not because she expected anything, but because something tugged at her. Something uneasy, something sharp. She opened the box slowly. Inside were envelopes, company folders, email printouts, documents that had nothing to do with receipts or household bills. These weren't random papers. They were organized, intentionally kept, intentionally hidden. One folder was labeled Brooks and Avery, proposal drafts. Madison frowned. Brooks and Avery was the name of the architectural project Daniel claimed had been delaying him for weeks. He had barely spoken about it, always brushing off details, always too vague. But inside the folder were sketches. Not by him. They were hers, designs she had created privately, concepts she never submitted because she didn't think they were good enough. Ideas she had shown Daniel months ago during a late-night brainstorming session, asking for his opinion, never imagining anything more but he had stolen them. Her hands tightened around the paper. She flipped through page after page, her lines, her notes, her ideas, all signed under Daniel's name in the presentation drafts. The betrayal hit her in a different place this time. Deeper, more personal. IT wasn't just her heart he had taken advantage of. IT was her work, her talent, her trust. And it didn't stop there. Another document revealed that Daniel and Elise had submitted the proposal together as a co-led project. Elise's name sat underneath Daniel's, both printed in bold. Meanwhile, Madison's name was nowhere. Her stomach twisted as she pieced the truth together, the late nights, the secrecy, the emails calling her too trusting, the way he kept her close, close enough to steal from, far enough to hide from. Daniel wasn't just unfaithful emotionally, he was using her creativity, using her kindness, using her belief in him. And Elise was helping him. Madison sat back on her heels, her breath shaking but her eyes dry, too dry. There were no tears left for this part. This was beyond heartbreak. This was betrayal woven into ambition, wrapped in deceit she hadn't even known she was fueling. A slow, steady fire began to burn beneath the surface of her chest. Not rage. Not yet. Power. A new kind of power she had never felt before. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was cold, deliberate, razor sharp. The kind of power that comes when you realize someone has underestimated you so deeply that they never prepared for the moment you'd rise. Madison carefully gathered the papers, slipping them into her bag with a calmness that felt foreign, almost frightening. She looked around the shed again. Noticing things differently now, tools she could use, boxes she needed to check, memories she was ready to silence. She stepped back into the fading light. A plan began forming in the quiet corners of her mind. Not revenge, at least not the petty kind. Something smarter, something fair, something that would return every ounce of truth to where it belonged. People like Daniel believed that kindness meant weakness, that silence meant acceptance, that someone like Madison would break before she ever fought back. They were wrong. She locked the shed door behind her, the click echoing like a promise, for the first time in her life. She wasn't afraid of the storm ahead. She was becoming it. Asterisk. Madison didn't sleep that night. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because her mind was sharper than it had ever been. Betrayal had stripped away every illusion, leaving behind someone she barely recognized. A woman who was done being gentle with people who mistook her kindness for softness. She sat at her kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of her, the overhead light casting long shadows across the wooden surface. Each page told a story she had missed, each detail stitching together the truth she had been too trusting to see. And with every passing minute, her resolve tightened, solidifying into something steady and unshakable. She opened her laptop and began typing, not frantically, not in anger, but with precision. She organized the files, scanned the documents, timestamped everything. She gathered proof of her original sketches, old email drafts, concept notes she had saved out of habit. Every small detail that proved those ideas were hers. For the first time, she saw the full picture. Daniel and Elise weren't just careless, they were calculated. They were building a future on work she had created, on trust she had given freely. And they expected her to stay quiet because she always had. But silence was no longer part of her story. Around midnight, she reached out to someone she hadn't spoken to in months, Adrian Moore, an old friend from college who now worked as a project consultant for major architectural firms. He was smart, fair, and someone who never let injustice slide. She sent him the files with a simple message: "Tell me if I'm wrong." His response came minutes later: "You're not wrong. And this is serious." Those words fueled her. By morning, they had set up a call. Adrian broke everything down clearly: the plagiarism, the ethical violations, the professional consequences Daniel and Elise could face. Madison listened without flinching. Each truth carved away another layer of the person she used to be, revealing someone more focused, someone more aware. She wasn't planning revenge. She was planning justice. The next step was delicate. She needed to move quietly, without alerting Daniel or Elise. Madison returned to work with a calmness that unsettled even her. She walked into the building not as the heartbroken woman people pitted yesterday, but as someone carrying a truth powerful enough to shift everything. Co-workers watched her with curious eyes. Some whispered, some avoided her. But Madison didn't care. She kept her steps measured, her expression unreadable. She went straight to her desk, logged in, and began backing up every piece of work she had ever uploaded. Proof of her style, her handwriting, her creative voice. Every file she downloaded was another step toward reclaiming the part of herself they tried to take. She didn't confront Daniel. Not yet. Confrontation was emotional, reactive, loud, and Madison had moved beyond loud feelings. She wanted the truth to land in a way that couldn't be twisted or excused. Throughout the day, she watched them from a distance, Daniel pacing nervously, Elise avoiding eye contact, both of them sensing something shifting but unable to name it. They didn't know she had the filings ready. They didn't know Adrian had connected her with a senior partner from a rival firm who was interested in her work. They didn't know she had scheduled a meeting with HR under the guise of project clarification, bringing along a sealed folder of documents. They didn't know that the woman they thought they had broken was simply watching them, studying them, preparing. Madison spent the rest of the week moving in silence, gathering support quietly, building alliances in places they had overlooked, speaking to people who actually valued integrity. With every passing day, she grew stronger, steadier, more certain of what needed to happen. The moment would come soon. The truth would hit hard. And when it did, the people who underestimated her would finally understand that protecting yourself isn't cruelty. It's survival. It's strength. It's reclaiming what was always yours. Madison wasn't the same woman who walked into that office days ago with a soft smile and a trusting heart. She was something far more powerful now, and the world around her was about to feel it. Asterisk, 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 the morning everything. Change didn't announce itself with chaos. It started quietly, the way a storm sometimes begins with nothing more than a gentle shift in the air. Madison walked into the office with her shoulders back and her head high, carrying a calmness so controlled it felt almost unnatural. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. The HR meeting had been scheduled for 9 a.m., but she arrived early, placing a sealed folder on the table and greeting the director with the kind of polite confidence that made him sit up straighter. He had expected tears, trembling, maybe anger. But Madison wasn't here to break down. She was here to reveal the truth. When Daniel and Elise walked in moments later, the change in the room was immediate. Daniel froze. Elise's face drained of color. They exchanged a quick look, one filled with panic, unspoken guilt, and the realization that whatever was about to happen, they weren't prepared. Madison didn't acknowledge them. Not out of spite, out of strength. The HR director opened the meeting by asking about a project dispute, and Madison let him speak before quietly pushing the folder forward. Inside were her sketches, her date-stamped drafts, printed messages, the stolen concepts, and a timeline that made everything painfully clear. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look for sympathy. She simply told the truth, steady, unwavering, undeniable. The director flipped through the pages, his expression tightening with every turn. The room grew heavier, the silence sharper. Daniel tried to interrupt twice, but the director stopped him. Elise tried to defend herself, but her voice shook too much to form sentences. Every lie they had built began collapsing under the weight of the evidence. When the director finally spoke, his tone was cold. He asked Daniel if he had used Madison's designs without her permission. Daniel stuttered, tried to blame confusion, tried to blame miscommunication, tried to blame anything but himself, but the proof was there. Then came Elise's turn. She attempted to minimize her involvement, but the printed emails contradicted every word she spoke. The room seemed to shrink around her, each truth hitting her harder than the last. HR didn't raise their voice. They didn't need to. Consequences don't need volume. They only need clarity. To be why the end of the meeting, both Daniel and Elise were placed under formal investigation. Their project privileges were revoked. Their access to files was frozen. And they were escorted out of the room with the kind of stunned silence that only comes from realizing their actions had finally caught up to them. But the fallout didn't end there. Later that afternoon, word spread across the studio. Real news this time, not rumors. People who had once whispered behind Madison's back now looked at her differently. With respect, with surprise, with the quiet recognition that they had underestimated her just as badly as Daniel had. The studio director approached her personally, gently asking if she would be willing to present her original concepts to the firm. Her work, the work she had once doubted, was now being acknowledged for what it truly was: impressive, innovative, and hers. The moment landed softly, settling into her heart like a small, warm victory. But there was one more shift the day had yet to deliver. Just as she was packing her things, her phone buzzed. A message from Adrian. Ready for the next step? The firm wants to meet you. A door that had never been opened before was now wide, inviting, full of promise. And it opened because she refused to let betrayal define her. She refused to let cruelty shrink her. She refused to let people who didn't value her decide her worth. As the sun set outside the studio's glass windows, Madison walked through the hallway with the kind of confidence that didn't need to be proven to anyone. Karma hadn't arrived with noise or vengeance. It arrived with truth, with dignity, with justice delivered quietly, cleanly, and completely. And for the first time in a long time, Madison felt something powerful rise inside her. A hope that didn't tremble, a strength that didn't waver, and a certainty that the next chapter would be written on her terms. Asterisk. The storm didn't break quietly. It crashed into the city with the force of a truth that had been buried for far too long. Morning news anchors spoke his name like a headline carved in iron. Daniel Morgan under full investigation. Morgan Dynamics in major scandal. Olivia Parker cleared of all wrongdoing. For the first time in weeks, Olivia woke up without a knot in her chest. The sunlight filtering through her curtains didn't feel heavy anymore. She stood in front of the mirror and saw something she hadn't seen in herself since the beginning. strength that wasn't borrowed or forced or hidden. It was hers. But peace wouldn't come yet. Not until she confronted the man who had destroyed her life, and the man who, unknowingly, had rebuilt her into someone stronger than ever. Across town, Daniel Morgan sat alone in his penthouse, a place once filled with confidence, noise, parties, power. Now it felt like an expensive cage. His phone buzzed nonstop. Lawyers, reporters, former friends pretending they had never known him. Even his father's name flashed on the screen, but Daniel didn't pick up. He couldn't face the disappointment. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The silence of the penthouse echoed louder than the chaos outside. His empire gone. His reputation shattered. His future slipping through his fingers faster than he could catch it. And the person who had pulled the final thread was also the person he once thought he had complete control over. Olivia. He whispered her name under his breath. Anger and regret twisting together until he couldn't tell one from the other. Then, a knock at the door. He froze. Another knock. He dragged himself across the marble floor and opened it. And there she was. Olivia Parker stood in front of him, not as the woman he had belittled, manipulated, underestimated, but as a force entirely her own. Calm, poised, unshakable. For a moment, neither of them said a word. The city hummed behind her. His world collapsed behind him. They stood between two realities, one ending, one beginning. Daniel finally stepped aside. She walked in. The penthouse looked different from her last visit. Not glamorous, not powerful, just hollow. Daniel sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. "I guess you're here to celebrate," he muttered. Olivia didn't flinch. "I'm not here for revenge," she said softly. "But I am here for truth." He laughed once, short, bitter. "Truth. Now you care about that." She didn't rise to the bait. That alone told him how much she had changed. "Daniel," she said firmly, "you framed me for something you did. You lied. You stole. You tried to ruin my life because you thought you could." Her voice didn't break. His did. "Olivia, I messed up." His breathing trembled. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. He looked down at his shaking hands, unable to finish. She waited. Silence burned between them until he finally spoke again. "I thought you'd always stay," he whispered. "I thought no matter what I did, you'd still be there." Olivia closed her eyes for a moment. "I was there," she said, "even when you didn't deserve it. Even when you hurt me. Even when the world believed your lies." Her voice softened, but it didn't weaken. "But I'm not that woman anymore." Daniel lifted his head, desperation flickering across his face. "Is there anything I can do? Anything that fixes this?" Olivia shook her head slowly. "This isn't something you fix," she said. "This is something you face." He swallowed hard. "The board removed me," he whispered. "My father. He won't even speak to me." Olivia's eyes held his, not with pity, but with truth. "Consequences aren't cruelty, Daniel. They're the echo of our choices." He ran a hand through his hair, anger rising again. "So that's it. You win, I lose." She stepped closer. "This was never about winning," she said quietly. "This was about surviving and reclaiming the life you tried to take from me." His lips parted, but she gently raised a hand. "I'm done fighting you," she said, "and I'm done letting you define my story." Her voice grew stronger, warmer, full of a quiet fire he couldn't extinguish even now. "I walked in here today to end the last chapter. Not with hate, but with closure." For the first time, Daniel truly understood Olivia hadn't come to destroy him. She had come to free herself from him. He exhaled shakily, shoulders sinking under the weight of everything he had lost. "Goodbye, Daniel," she whispered. She turned and walked to the door. But just before stepping out, she paused. The city lights reflected in her eyes when she looked back at him. "You should learn who you are when no one is watching and when everything is gone." And with that, she left, leaving him alone in the cold echo of the life he built and the ruins he created. As Olivia stepped outside, the air felt lighter, warmer, alive. The world that once crushed her was now opening, piece by piece. And her next chapter was about to begin, on her terms, in her power. And without the shadows of the past, the city skyline stretched before Olivia Parker as the sun dipped low, painting skyscrapers in shades of gold and amber. She stood quietly on the balcony of her Manhattan office, coffee in hand, the hum of life below feeling lighter than ever. Every challenge, every betrayal, every sleepless night had led her here. toward a peace she hadn't dared imagine for years. Her journey had been painful, but it had also been a reclamation. She traced her fingers over the framed law degree on her desk, once a symbol of what she had lost, now a testament to everything she had rebuilt. The name beneath it, Olivia Parker, founder and CEO, shone with quiet authority, unchallenged and fully hers. Across town, the headlines continued to buzz. Olivia Parker triumphs, woman behind the empire exposed. From betrayal to brilliance, Olivia's story. But she no longer needed the world's approval. She had found her own. Her phone vibrated. Messages from young women she mentored, emails from clients inspired by her vision, congratulations from peers who had once doubted her. She smiled, feeling a warmth that wasn't tied to validation, but to purpose. She had transformed pain into power, betrayal into strategy, and invisibility into impact. Later that day, at the opening of the Olivia Parker Foundation for Women, she addressed a hall filled with hopeful, ambitious women. Some clutched business plans, some notebooks. Others simply sought courage to reclaim their dreams. This, she began, voice steady, warm, and resonant, is for every woman who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. For every one of you who thought the world had hidden your light. Know this, your brilliance cannot be stolen. Your story cannot be erased. And your dreams are still waiting for you. Applause swelled through the hall. Olivia moved among the attendees, shaking hands, offering encouragement, exchanging laughter. Every interaction, every smile, every shared story was a testament to her journey, and a promise that others could rise too. Back in her office, as the city lights flickered on and the evening settled in, she reflected on the past. The heartbreaks, the stolen credits, the sleepless nights, all of it had led to her rebirth. She felt lighter, freer, and stronger than she had ever been. Then she turned to the camera, her eyes steady, filled with purpose. Subscribe. Because every week we tell stories of courage, of women who rose after being underestimated, and of strength that cannot be hidden. Comment below, share your story, your challenge, or the woman who inspires you to rise again. Let's remind the world that a woman's light can never be dimmed. As she placed the cup of coffee down, a soft smile curved her lips. The journey had ended, but the legacy was only beginning. Olivia Parker had healed. She had reclaimed her life, and she had created a space where every woman could do the same. And in that quiet moment, the city outside seemed to echo her triumph, a heartbeat of possibility, hope, and unstoppable power.